at the Mariana Kistler Beach Museum of Art here on campus. We're so happy to see you here tonight. And this is...
Good evening. My name is Kimandra Taylor, and I'm the Special Programs Director of the Black Student Union.
We are here to work together to welcome and introduce our distinguished speaker, Kevin Willmott. I want to let everyone know that this program is being live streamed to audiences at 3 Kansas community colleges, Dodge City, Highland, and Hutchinson. So welcome also to those audiences. Those audiences at the remote sites will be able to submit questions via email to Jennifer Harlan. And so periodically she may step to the mic during the Q&A and read a question from those audiences. We do have a mic on the side, or we will, for people who want to ask questions after Kevin Willmott's presentation. I want to remind everyone to fill out a response card as you're leaving this evening. They are on the desk outside in the hallway. We'd love to know your thoughts. The Mariana Kistler Beach Museum of Art, the Institute for Civic Dialogue and Democracy, and the Center for Engagement and Community Development are proud to present this closing keynote talk for the Art of Democracy Symposium, which has been going on all day here in the Union.
Kevin Willmott is our distinguished speaker. He is an associate professor of film and media studies at the University of Kansas. An acclaimed Kansas-based filmmaker, Kevin Willmott co-wrote the film BlacKkKlansman with director Spike Lee. The film is based on a true story and book by Ron Stallworth, a young African-American police officer who infiltrated a cell of the Ku Klux Klan in Colorado Springs, Colorado in the late 1970s. Last month, BlacKkKlansman received an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay and was nominated in 5 other Oscar categories. The film has received prestigious film awards internationally, including the Grand Prix at Cannes Film Festival, the award for Best Adapted Screenplay from the British Academy of Film and Television Arts, and others. His talk this evening is entitled BlacKkKlansman, a response to the resurgence of overt racism in America today.
Lastly, thanks to the co-sponsors that have made Kevin Willmott's visit possible. The Black Student Union here at K-State, the Center for Engagement, the Department of Art, the Dow Multicultural Fund at Hale Library, UFM Community Learning Center. Many thanks as well to the staff of the K-State Union, especially Kedrick Elmore, and the Office of Mediated Instruction and Conference Management Services of Global Campus. Thank you all. And now please help me welcome Kevin Willmott.
Wow. That's all I'm going to say, just wow, you know. It's so good to be here. It's always good to be, you know, Manhattan's not my hometown, but we hung out in Manhattan a lot growing up. My hometown is, of course, Junction City, down the road a piece. And Junction City is and was a great, great, great place to grow up. And when I was a kid, when I was in high school, they brought us over to K-State. I was in the Upward Bound program. Do you still have the Upward Bound program here? Yeah, they brought us over, and you know, I'll talk a little bit about a bunch of stuff, so just kind of go with me, y'all, you know. But it is really, really great to be here, and you know, for me, you know, Kansas and Manhattan and Junction City is kind of how and why I'm a writer and a filmmaker today, because, you know, Junction City, when I was a kid, Junction City was not, you know, was kind of looked down upon. Anybody from Junction City here? Put your hands up. You know, what did they call Junction City back in the days? Junktown. Junktown. And the reason they called Junction City Junktown was because it was so multicultural, because it was so diverse, because it was so interracial. And at that time, you know, diversity, I mean, they didn't even use the word diversity back then in the 70s, right? And so things like, you know, biracial people and interracial marriages and all of those kind of things that were just common in Junction City. I always like to talk about the block I grew up on. So the block I grew up on 10th Street in Junction City. So the block I grew up on, there was a white family lived next to us. And then there was a black and Japanese family across the street from us. Then next door to them was a black family. And next door to them was a black and Italian family. And next door to them was a black and German family. And next door to them was a black and Filipino family. And next door to them was a white family. And next door to them was a white and Japanese family. And next door to them was a black and Korean family. And next door to them was a black and Vietnamese family. And that's in one block in a small town in Kansas of 20,000 people. 20,000 people. And so what Junction City taught me was that race doesn't matter at all, and that race matters a great deal. It doesn't matter at all because, obviously, growing up in a neighborhood like that, we all just played together. Race didn't matter at all. But race does matter in the sense that you need to know who you are, and you need to be proud of who you are. And that was the thing that was not sold and taught to us at that time. And so they kind of looked at Junction City with all these interracial, biracial people, and they thought it was like an embarrassment. So the diversity of Junction City was not celebrated, right? Wasn't celebrated. And so the thing that kind of taught me was that, my father, I had a weird, growing up. My father was 60 when I was born. My father was born in 1898. And so that's just 30-some years after slavery. And so the fact that my father was 60, was born in 1898, I grew up around old people. Because his friends were old, and my mother was like in her 40s, which is kind of old to be having kids too, right? I don't want to speak for the ladies here, but but so it was a different kind of thing that I grew up in, and it was great because that neighborhood I grew up in, the Hammonds. We got any Hammonds in the house here tonight? The Hammonds were the black family of Junction City, and Mr. Hammond, Roger Hammond, lived down the street from us, and he would come down and he would bring the Kansas City paper to us, and because that was a big city newspaper, and so and he was good friends with my mother, and so what I learned from them was I got to hear all the old stories about Junction City, about Fort Riley. I heard those stories about how Jackie Robinson was stationed at Fort Riley, and Joe Louis was stationed with him at that time, and they used to hang out at the what used to be in Junction City the Little Theater was the Black USO Club there, and so you'd hear all these great historical kind of stories about things that a lot of people didn't know about. And so all of those kind of things kind of made me kind of interested in history as a kid. And so all of those stories kind of stayed with me. And I remember as a kid telling my mother that, I'm gonna write a book about 9th Street. And I didn't write a book, but I did make a movie about 9th Street. And that was my first film. And the thing that all of my movies kind of deal with in one way or another is race. And the thing about race that I think is so important is that race is directly connected to democracy. And that America The great thing about America is that it looks like the audience here tonight. A lot of different faces, different colors, different national backgrounds, different countries of origin. And that's the thing that makes America great. And that is directly connected to democracy. And so race and democracy are like hand in glove. And you can't have one without the other. And so the more we understand race and the more we understand the importance of race and how we can live with each other with all our racial differences and backgrounds, the better democracy works. And I don't think we kind of put those two things together like we should. And the reason that I think that we have so much trouble in the country is because we don't marry those two things together very well. And the thing that has happened in the last couple of years is that we've seen what happens when we don't marry those two things together very well. There are threats to democracy. So BlacKkKlansman was a film that well, let me back up a little bit. I'm gonna first tell you how I became a filmmaker, because it's a pretty good story. You know. Now that I got an Oscar, I can talk this way, you know. You know. So I was in high school, and I wasn't a bad student. I was always a pretty good student, average student. I was smart enough I didn't have to study too much, and the expectations for black kids weren't real high. And I remember one day I was in class, and I was in this English class, and I kind of looked around, and I noticed all the other kids in the class were all the slow kids. And it's like, wow, they got me in the class with the slow kids. And I was smart enough to kind of know I'm in the class with the slow kids. And so then you have to say, well, I guess I'm slow too, you know? So that whole thing, that example was indicative of the lack of expectations they had for us. And, but I had a teacher there. Her name was Mrs. Creighton, and she was a black teacher. I think she was married to a man that was a soldier in Fort Riley. And she thought I had some talent. And so she encouraged me to write this script. And back then, this is the 70s, there weren't video cameras on your phone. You remember that? Remember those things? Back days when phones were on the wall. Remember those old days? Phone books, things like that, right? Kids don't even know what a phone book is now, right? So she encouraged me to tell this story in class, and so I wrote the script. And at the time, we were going to the Call Theater in Junction, and we were watching all the blaxploitation movies, Superfly, Shaft, and every week there was a different black film. And man, I lived in the Call Theater, right? And so she encouraged me to kind of tell this story. And so I wrote this script. It was called The Point of No Return. And me and a buddy of mine named Fred Jackson, we were detectives. And I got some play guns at duck walls. And we were detectives, and it was like 21 Jump Street, kind of like in the high school. We were detectives in the high school, right? And back then, the video camera was this huge thing. And it had a reel-to-reel kind of thing. Do you remember that? Anybody remember those things? It was like this big, huge thing. And she let us make this movie. And I wish I had a copy of that movie now, because, but it was, and Fred, who had a really tough time growing up, I mean, he was so into the movie we were making, he would come to my house in the morning and get me to go to school. Now, that's a lot for us, right? So, but the reality of the high school at that time, we had a really racist principal. I mean, seriously racist guy. And what happened was that there was a riot. And I want to talk about this riot for a second, because I'm actually kind of making a new movie that's kind of about a riot. And riots quite often happen because of misunderstandings about what's really the source of the frustration that causes the riot. So the riot happened at our high school in Junction City because we thought it was black and white, but it was really student and administration. It was really the administration that had not understood what was going on at school. And because of that, frustrations built and built and built, and eventually they kind of exploded. And Dr. King called a riot, he said, a riot is the language of the unheard. And the unheard is the fact that in those days, there was nobody we could go and talk to about what was frustrating about school at that time, black or white. And so eventually, you know, dumb things happen with kids and frustration spilled over and a riot happens. And I wasn't in the riot, but I watched the riot. It was my buddy Brett Stevens, me and him were on the second floor of the high school, and we were looking outside, and dudes just started attacking guys. You know, no rhyme or reason. And so it really frustrated me that to see my friends get kicked out of school, all of those things. And so eventually, the frustrations kept building and building. And we started kind of being little, like, underground guerrilla guys. We were pulling fire alarms, throwing firecrackers in the cafeteria. Dumb stuff that kids think is the way of fighting back. But eventually, our plan was to set a Molotov cocktail off in the bathroom. Really dumb. I mean, really dumb. And so I'm in class, and my teacher, you know, it was the first black kind of history class that they had at the school. And so I was like right in the middle, I was like breaking stuff down. Yeah, man, and this is the deal, da-da-da. You know, and the teacher, he loved me, and we was right in the middle of some cool stuff. Kevin Willmott, come to the office, please. Kevin Willmott. And it's like, uh-oh. And so my buddies got caught, and they said, who's behind all this stuff? And they said, Kevin Willmott. And so they went to my locker, and they found the Molotov cocktail. Woo! And I'll tell you this little piece of the story. So mothers, they should hire mothers to work at those things at the airport for security. Because mothers can detect. They can just, my mother, you know, I had the thing in my gym bag, and she said, what's in that bag? And I said, my gym clothes. She said, uh-huh. And she knew. And so when I got busted, they arrested me. The principal came in, and he laughed in my face. Laughed in my face. And then the vice principal came in and said, do you play sports? And if I had played sports, I would have been a Negro of some worth. And because I didn't play sports, they kicked me out. And they kicked me out, and they said, don't ever come back. So when you're 16, and I'd never been in trouble ever in my life, got arrested. The police were the coolest guys of the whole deal. The police, you know, they had to arrest me. I'm in the police car, and the policeman said, we really hate coming down here with all these troubles all the time. And, you know, he said, I'm from California, and we had the same problems in California. And I really feel for what you guys are going through. This is a white policeman, his name was Schultz. And so the thing that happened was I worked on the CETA program. Anybody remember the CETA program? The CETA program was a great government program for low-income kids to have a job in the summertime. And I worked at St. Mary's Cemetery in Junction City. And we cut the grass and we, you know, all that stuff at the cemetery. And so Father Keoghan, who was the pastor at St. Xavier School, he wanted to get me into school there because they'd thrown me out. And he said, and at that time, there was another priest by the name of Father Frank Cody, and he had just become a priest. And now he's the pastor here in Manhattan at St. Thomas More Church. And Father Frank took me under his wing, and he loved movies, and I loved movies, and they helped to get me into St. Xavier's High School. And basically after that, I became really good buddies with Father Frank. And we talked about movies all the time. And at that time, I wanted to be an actor. And he told me, I don't know if you can be an actor, dude. Which now I have to tell my students, I don't know if you can be an actor, dude. But he encouraged me to really, go to school and study theater. And at that time, there was nothing around here with film, so I studied theater first. And so he kind of basically ordered me to go to college. I mean, he just would not take no for an answer. And so I went to a little small school called Marymount College in Salina. It's closed now. And Dr. Dennis Denning was the theater director there. And that's where I did my first plays. And that's where I wrote the play 9th Street. And that's the play that then became my first film, 9th Street. So the way I always look at it, if I had not gotten thrown out of high school, I wouldn't be a filmmaker today. And I wouldn't have an Oscar. That's a kind of a weird thing to say, isn't it? But it's kind of true. And the reason that all of that happened was because of race and because of the lack of democracy that went with that. And so those things have stayed with me kind of my entire life. And I've tried to understand them more and more. And I've tried to explore those themes in my movies in various ways. And with BlacKkKlansman, specifically, I'd worked with Spike on the film Chirac. And that was set in Chicago. But I made a film called CSA, Confederate States of America. And this is probably, for those people who might have students that are trying to be filmmakers or, know people. I made this film called CSA, Confederate States of America. It cost $40,000 to make. It took me about 3 years to make it. And it was about what would happen if the South had won the Civil War. Yeah, yeah. And it got into the Sundance Film Festival. And at the time, Spike and I had the same agents. And Spike heard about the film and he wanted to see the film. And he saw the film and really loved it. And so it's presented by Spike Lee. And that's how I met Spike Lee. So when people say, well, how do you break into the industry? Well, you break into the industry by doing something. You don't wait for them to figure out you're great. You don't wait for them to see you got talent. You don't wait for anything, and you don't ask permission from anything. You've got to find a way to just do your thing. So this is a story that I wanted to tell, and I found a way to tell it. It took me 3 years to make that film, but we got it made, and Spike loved it, and we've kind of been working together kind of ever since. So with BlacKkKlansman, he approached me, and Jordan Peele gave him a call. Jordan Peele had just had the big success with Get Out. Thank you, Get Out, great film. Yeah. And so he approached Spike and said, "I want you to direct this film, Spike, but the script needs a lot of work." So Spike called me, and we went and met Jordan in L.A. And bada bing, bada boom, it happened really fast. And so we started working on the script. And so what I'll do here, I want to show you the trailer. For those of you who've maybe not seen the film, let's take a look at the trailer, and then I'll talk more about the film. Can you control it from back there? Control it from here? Okay.
There's never been a black cop in this city. We think he might be the man who owns up around here.
Hello, this is Ron Stallworth calling. Who am I speaking with?
This is David Duke.
Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. That David Duke?
God. Last time I checked. What can I do you for?
Well, since you asked, I hate blacks. I hate Jews, Mexicans and Irish, Italians and Chinese. But my mouth to God's ears, I really hate those black rats. And anyone else, really, that doesn't have pure white Aryan blood running through their veins.
I'm happy to be talking to a true white American.
God bless white America. The KKK is planning an attack.
How do you propose to make this investigation?
We'll establish contact over the phone. We'll need a white officer to play me when they meet face to face.
You for the white race, Ron?
Oh, hell yeah.
So there becomes a combined Ron Stallworth.
Can you do that?
With the right white man, we can do anything.
When's the last time they let a rookie lead an investigation? Oh, that's right. Never.
Okay, become his friend. Let's get invited back.
So what kind of stuff you guys do?
Cross burnings, marches. This is fixing to be a big year for us.
You ask too many questions. You undercover or something?
We must unite and organize to fight racism.
Are you down for the liberation of black people?
Power to the people.
All power to all the people.
All power to all the people.
That's right, sister.
For you, it's a crusade. For me, it's a job.
You're Jewish. That hatred, doesn't that piss you off?
You're taking this Jew lie detector test.
Why are you acting like you ain't got skin in the game?
I'm telling you, the wars are coming.
White power! Black power!
Knights of the Ku Klux Klan.
That's us, Stallworth brothers. We're on a roll, baby.
America first.
America first! America first!
If I would have known this was a Klan meeting, I wouldn't have taken this mother.
Okay, so he approached us to write the script and make the film, and so Ron Stallworth, who's the real guy in the film, was the first black detective in Colorado Springs. This is in the 1970s, and he was a young guy, didn't really know what he was doing. And as you see in the trailer, they put him in charge of kind of monitoring radical groups, and there's a lot of radical groups in the 70s. And so he saw an ad in the paper for the Klan, and he just called the number. And he was so young and didn't know what he was doing. He used his real name with these guys. And of course, they fell in love with him immediately, and they said, come on down, Ron, and join the club. And of course, as we have a line in the film, you probably shouldn't do that, So he had to find a white policeman to play him with the Klan. So there was two Ron Stallworths, a black Ron Stallworth, the real Ron Stallworth, and a white Ron Stallworth. And in the story, we made him Jewish. In real life, he wasn't Jewish. But we made him Jewish because, one of the big ideas of the movie is a concept called two-ness. And two-ness is this thing that W.B. Du Bois talked about in his book, The Souls of Black Folks. And two-ness is what he said that African Americans often have this warring kind of, this double kind of consciousness, kind of two warring factions within them, pulling themselves in opposite directions, being black and being an American. And the thing that the example I often use is like Trayvon Martin, for instance. So when Trayvon Martin was killed and the killer was acquitted, African Americans, a lot of us were upset about that. And so the whole thing of being black and then looking at the American justice system and feeling like it failed you and failed Trayvon. So those are those two warring factions, like being black, but you're also an American. And sometimes those things don't mix real well. Again, kind of going back to democracy again. And so W.B. Du Bois called this two-ness, and he said that African Americans walk around with this double consciousness all the time, being black and being an American, and it's a struggle. And so in the film, what I did was I made Ron Stallworth, his two-ness is not just that he's black and an American, he's also blue. He's a policeman. And so the fact that he's a policeman also is a factor. And then we made his girlfriend, who really didn't exist in real life, just for the record, Patrice in the movie. We made her, based on kind of an Angela Davis, Kathleen Cleaver kind of character. So she's got this serious kind of African-American consciousness going on, and she kind of falls for Ron, Ron falls for her, but she doesn't like the police. And she feels like anybody that supports the police that's black is kind of a traitor. And of course, Ron wants to be a policeman and likes being a policeman and wants to try to make this thing work. So that's his two-ness. And then the white Ron Stallworth, we made him Jewish because that's his two-ness. He's a white American, but he's also a Jewish American. And in the course of kind of his life, he has lost his Jewish self. And one of the things that I've seen happen to young people, and essentially as I speak around the country, I see young people coming to me afterwards and talk about how this relates to their life. But I saw a lot growing up in Junction City, and I see it in Lawrence, and it really is kind of everywhere. And it's a thing where African-American kids, if they have white friends, their white friends, out of love and brotherhood, want to offer them honorary whiteness. And what honorary whiteness is that they kind of say, like, I don't think of you as black. You're not really black as far as I'm concerned. You're like me. And of course, that makes it easy to be your friend because the black thing doesn't get in the way anymore. And they think you're doing you a favor, but they're really not doing you a favor. And that's what had happened to Adam Driver's character in the film. His friends had given him honorary whiteness, and he had kind of lost his Jewish self. And that's the thing that we talked about from the neighborhood in Junction City, how race matters and race doesn't matter at all. And so it doesn't matter at all because we're all Americans trying to figure this thing out. But it does matter in the sense that you got to hold on to that piece of yourself, that who you are. And that your background does matter. And we should celebrate that. We shouldn't try to convince you to let that part of yourself go. That you need to hold on to, and it shouldn't be a thing that divides, it should be a thing that enhances and brings people together. But oftentimes it ends up kind of pushing people away. And so your white friends who are just trying to be your buddy, they think they're doing you a favor by saying, hey man, I don't think of you as black. And it's like, no man, you need to think of me as black because I am black. And it doesn't matter most of the time, but occasionally it does matter. And black folks know when it matters. When you get pulled over by the police, kind of matters sometimes. When you're going for a job interview and they look at you and, and you're black then, and you can't hide it. And if the person on the other side of the desk doesn't kind of share the same consciousness you share, then that may be a problem. So that whole thing of trying to forget who you are is what Adam Driver's character is trying to deal with. And so being around Klan guys who are spilling hate all day long, it made Adam Driver's character have to finally deal with who he really was. And so that was the real theme for me, of BlacKkKlansman. But then the other part of it is that, I always love when people laugh at the trailer because I know I've done my job. But what I mean by that is that the idea of the film was always to take hate and not apologize for it, not try to tone it down, not try to make it acceptable in any kind of way, but to really show how ugly it really is. And by revealing how ugly and insane and crazy it is, you then reveal the absurdity of it. And that's where the humor is. So you don't really tell jokes in the movie. It's not about trying to make people laugh. All we really do is show you how insane hate is, and you have to go, wow. And that's where the humor comes from. So it's a tricky thing because it's not like regular movies where you set up, punchline, joke. It is more complicated than that. And it requires the audience to have to be a little uncomfortable. And that's the thing that making these movies has kind of taught me, really. That one of the keys to being an American is being uncomfortable. That the more uncomfortable you are, the more American you are. And the whole idea of trying to be comfortable is the most un-American thing you can be in the whole idea of being an American. So when you see a gay couple kiss on TV and it makes you uncomfortable, that's good. Because you need to get used to that, because gay people are Americans too. And you have to deal with that, and you have to get over that. And when you see an interracial couple kiss on TV, black or white, you got to deal with that, because that's a part of America. When you see a Muslim family on TV, and your faith may be different than theirs, you've got to deal with the fact that Muslims are part of what America makes America great as well, as opposed to some folks think. And so you've got to deal with that. And so that discomfort is totally connected to what it means to be an American. And that's the thing that I think is at the center of what an American really is. And what makes democracy really kind of make sense. And what's challenging is that we tell people the exact opposite all the time. That we tell them that you're supposed to be comfortable all the time. And that you're not supposed to kind of feel a little, out of kilter with things. And that's why diversity wasn't celebrated in Junction City when we were kids. Because it made people uncomfortable, so they just badmouthed us. And that's the same thing we're seeing today. I have Muslim students at KU, just like I've heard people, my friends that teach here at K-State, talk about how their Muslim students can't go home to visit their relatives now because of the Muslim ban. Can you imagine that? You travel halfway around the country to go to a great university, and you get in, you get accepted, and then this law comes from America, and they say, you can't go back home because we may not let you back in because of your faith, which is the whole idea of why America was created, right? Remember that thing in school they taught us? What did they tell us? Like, religious liberty, like, the pilgrims. They're giving us a hard time over here. Let's go over there instead. And then we show up, and now we're doing the same thing that we said we left the persecution from. And so that's that thing about discomfort, and that thing about democracy, and that thing about diversity, and that thing about race. So then what happens, because of that discomfort then makes it really easy to sell fear. And fear becomes one of the biggest tools in the dictator's toolbox. I was watching a show on PBS the other day. It's called The Dictator's Playbook. Has anybody seen that? It's a really good show. And they show all these dictators around the world, past and present, and how they operated and how they kind of took over their countries and all that stuff. And the one that really kind of surprised me, and I think of myself as a history guy, but it really surprised me, was the one about Mussolini. And I always thought, the Hitler thing with the Sieg Heil, I always thought he made that up. But actually, he got that from Mussolini. And Mussolini created fascism, which is racism, militarism, and violence. And so, he basically said he saw that there's an opportunity here, dictator, there's an opportunity here for me to sell this to the public, and I can basically take over this country. So you kind of sell militarism, and so you kind of, you get people all riled up behind kind of a false patriotism. And then you sell violence, which, was basically we're going to grab anybody that's not like us, and we're going to beat them up. And then you sell nationalism, which is we're all doing it for the flag. And, you know, one of the best examples of that is just what happened this last week, where the president is talking about John McCain. And so here's a guy who is a Vietnam veteran, a war hero, been in a prison camp for all these years, and the president says that, you know, he doesn't like him, and that he's not a hero, and no one really says much about that. But then when Colin Kaepernick, when he took a knee to protest African Americans and others being shot by police when they're unarmed, people said that was very unpatriotic. And they linked that directly to patriotism and the flag. But then when you look at somebody say this about John McCain, and they don't say anything about that, so you have to say to yourself, what's really going on here? So it's a picking and choosing of when we are going to be patriotic and when we're not going to be patriotic. And that's the weird place we're in right now in our democracy. You know, democracy is a really complicated thing. And as we've kind of been seeing for the last couple of years. And it requires us to always be vigilant. I made a film about William Allen White, the great journalist from Emporia. And William Allen White ran the Klan out of Kansas. Most people don't know that story now. But the Klan in the 1920s and 30s was taking over America. And they were thought of as the Kiwanis Club. My father, the old man that he was, he told me in Junction City, and they were in every city in Kansas, by the way, every city. And they used to march down the street at the 4th of July like the Kiwanis Club. And they were totally accepted, and no one was shocked, and it was not it was not like considered anything outrageous or out of the norm. And William Allen White saw this, the great journalist from Emporia, he saw this and he said, this is a threat to our democracy. They didn't like Catholics, they didn't like Jews, they didn't like blacks, and they would attack you. But more than anything, they would just kind of make you second-class citizens. So William Allen White tried to take them on, and he ran for office to expose the Klan. And fortunately, he did not become governor, but he did expose the Klan, and they were kind of pushed out of Kansas. And there's another story that goes along with that, and it's a crazy story, and it's from our area as well. Anybody know the guy J.R. Brinkley? So J.R. Brinkley is the goat gland doctor. And the goat gland doctor is the guy who, in the 1930s, is selling the idea that if I take the glands out of a goat and put them in a man, he will now be fertile again. It was like the Viagra of the day. And people believed it. And people had those operations. And Dr. Brinkley was in Milford, Kansas. And he had a radio station that had this huge power that could reach the entire country. And so people from the entire country came to Milford, Kansas for him to give them the goat gland surgery. But he also became a politician. And he ran for governor of Kansas. And William Allen White and other people saw this as a threat. And so they got together, and William Allen White knew the Attorney General, and they made a plan. So they said, like, his name wasn't on the ballot, but he was going to be a write-in candidate. Brinkley was going to be a write-in candidate. And they said, if the only way the votes will be accepted is if it says J.R. Brinkley. Couldn't be Dr. Brinkley, couldn't be Brinkley, couldn't be anything like it. Had to be J.R. Brinkley. And of course, there was a lot of votes that weren't counted. And if they had been counted, he would have been governor of Kansas. Think about that. The goat gland guy would have been your leader. So it's a great example of how fragile democracy can be. and how you've got to be on top of it all the time. You got to be vigilant. You got to be kind of looking like, hey, they're treating those guys bad. So eventually that same problem is gonna probably get to me at some point. So if they've got a Muslim ban, well, you know, let there be a terrorist attack. What if some black folks did a horrible terrorist attack in the country and 20,000 people died? And there was an uproar that said, I don't know about black folks anymore. I don't know if you can trust black folks. Would there be a black folk ban? What if gay folks did something like that? Would there be a gay ban? What if Baptists did that for some Baptist reason? That's kind of funny, isn't it, a little bit? But you see my point. And when you take a group of people and you use them as the example for the whole, becomes a very dangerous idea. And so that's the challenge we've got right now. And the joke I always tell, you know, those of you who've seen BlacKkKlansman, at the end of the film, we show the incident at Charlottesville. And the joke that Spike and I always kind of said to each other was that, you know, we didn't really write David Duke and Donald Trump into the movie. They kind of wrote themselves into the film. And the fact that David Duke was at Charlottesville, and the fact that the president said that they were good people on both sides, that they were good Nazis and good Klansmen on both sides. You know, the other joke I always tell now is I'm the only guy in the country that has benefited from the presidency of Donald Trump. And it's been a good ride for me, because no one ever says to me now, there's no racism happening in America now, right, Kevin? People don't say that to me anymore. I used to always have to kind of explain and defend that. Not so much anymore. And, you know, from the attack on the synagogue in Pittsburgh, the horrible massacre that just happened in New Zealand, where they cited our president as an influence and inspiration. We should be very concerned about these things. And I'm not talking politics, I'm talking about democracy. There's a difference here. You know, this is not about him, this is about us. This is about Americans. This is about how you respond to threats to your country. This is about how you see yourself in your country. This is about the concept you have of your country. And that's the thing that we have to always go back to, because that's the thing that democracy requires. That's the thing that William Allen White was trying to tell us. That's the thing that we try to say in the film, is that these guys didn't choose to really do this thing. They kind of stumble into it, and then when they stumble into it, they see what's at stake. They see how hate can put everything that we love in the country at stake. And so then you have to do something about it. But I could go on like this for a couple of weeks. You know, in closing, I'll just say that Junction City was a great, great, great place to grow up. And it was one of those rare places that really kind of, you know, took the bad part of what America had given us, and we took it and we did something great with it. And we taught ourselves to love ourselves in our own way. And our white friends learned from that, and our black friends learned from that, and all the other races that we grew up with in those neighborhoods, we all learned from that. And that's the thing that will make America great again. Thank you very much. I can take questions now. Sure. Okay.
Thank you very much for a great lecture. And you made the comment that democracy is fragile. And I'm wondering if you would comment on the election of Donald Trump as president as an issue with respect to the fragility of democracy.
Well, yeah, I think, one of the best examples of the fragile thing of democracy is the concept about fake news. And that institutions that we rely upon to hold democracy in check and to hold it in a healthy, strong way, those institutions have to be nourished and they have to be protected. And you can't, embody the general public with the idea that they can't be trusted. I mean, none of these institutions have ever been perfect. We know that. I can't believe I'm defending the FBI, But the FBI is a great organization. Has it done some bad things in the past? Yes, it did. It followed Dr. King. It sent Dr. King death threats. I mean, it did a lot of horrible things to African Americans in the 1960s. Do we have to keep an eye on those guys? Yes, we do. But the concept of the FBI and the institution of the FBI is one of the things that keeps America strong. And it protects us. And when you make the general public not believe in the idea of the FBI, or that there's a bunch of guys there that have a secret FBI that are doing this other thing outside of the real FBI, and they're out to get me and all those kind of things, that's a really dangerous concept. Because one of the things about our freedom is that our freedom allows people that we don't know to secretly kind of go and put a bunker in their house and stockpile weapons. The Coast Guard guy a couple months ago, right? And they found him with all these weapons, and he was getting ready to do an attack on CNN and a bunch of Democratic politicians. And so the fact that we have these freedoms that we can exercise, we have to be really smart and honest about how we talk about these institutions. And we have to criticize them based in facts and not based in agendas. And that, I think, is the big kind of threat that's going on right now. Because when people start to believe that these institutions are failing them, that's when they turn to hate groups, and that's when they eventually lead to violence. Yes, sir.
Just as one illustration of what you're talking about, Kevin, there was a recent On Being program with Teju Cole, who is a photographer and a poet, and he made the point that there was a circulated picture of a bus with for immigrants with nothing but kids' seats in it, 48 seats, packed, obviously only for children, only separated from their parents. And the irony of that is that this is under the Obama administration, even though everybody assumed otherwise. So I think it just illustrates that point. I have a lot of good to say about Barack Obama. There were some bad things that happened.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the notion that the American government is separating, that, refugees are coming to the border and we're taking their kids from them. And you know that movie Lion? Anybody seen that movie Lion? It's about the little boy that gets separated from his brother, and then it takes him like 20 years to go back and find his mother and his brother and all that again. We're going to be seeing that movie in about 20 years. And it's going to be about those kids that have been separated from their parents. Watch my word. You'll be seeing that film, and we'll be heartbroken about it. And it's our government that separated them from their mothers and fathers. I mean, the idea of separating someone from their mother and their father and not even keeping a little note to say, oh, that's Mary's kid. Her address is this, and her phone number is that, and, something. The fact that the American government would do that to children and not write down their parents' name and where you could find them. My God, that's insane. And they're doing that in our name, and they're doing that with our money, our tax money. We should be appalled. Yes, ma'am.
Talking about a little bit about your analysis, you were saying a minute ago, if if a Muslim has done something, then it becomes this terrorist act and all Muslims are condemned. If a black person does something, then all blacks. If a gay person does something, then all gays. And the one exception that we have to that is white men. Because if a white man does it, he's an individual acting on his own, even regardless of his white nationalist ties, regardless of who he's been associated with. He is acting on his own. He's an individual. And I saw it first with Timothy McVeigh.
Thank you very much.
Because I spent a long time in Oklahoma City. And when it first came out, they were looking for Arabs. And I said, oh my God, no. This is the anniversary of Waco. That's a white man that did that.
Ooh.
I knew that the minute I saw that news story. So there's something something really important that needs to shift around how we see individuality and how we see group identity. And I wonder if you have any comment on that.
Well, I think. Thank you so much for your comment, and you're exactly right. I mean, that's the only group that doesn't get the stereotype, and I think the real kind of response to that maybe can lead us toward a safer democracy, maybe, is that we've got to teach our history better, and if people know the history. I mean, people now, young people don't even know who Timothy McVeigh is. They don't even know about Oklahoma City. I mean, the short attention span memory of Americans is amazing. And it really is a threat to democracy in that sense. And because it's an uncomfortable story, we don't teach that in school. And it's that discomfort again that doesn't make us embrace that. And connect those lessons that we can learn from Oklahoma City. I mean, you never even hear people talk about Oklahoma City. It is the example of American domestic terrorism, and we are losing more people to that than any other form of terrorism. And that fact is not being discussed. And that should be something that should be on all our lips right now. And it's not about condemning white men. I have white friends. I've eaten with white people. White people are okay. White people are okay. They're okay. You got to get past that. You got to get past that, and you got to be able to look at history and say, this bad thing happened. It doesn't condemn anybody. It's just a bad thing that happened, and we have to understand the facts around it. We have to work through our discomfort. We have to take ownership of it. Right now, the history owns us. We don't own the history. And so when we own the history, we'll have a free and easy conversation about these things. And then some of these things may not happen so easily anymore. Yes, sir.
First, congratulations on your Oscar. I went to your screening of Destination Planet Negro, and there are a lot fewer people in the room than there are.
Thank you for showing up.
Yeah, could you comment on our role as academics to educate the public? Because Trump is symptomatic of the fact that there's lots of people who will let him do anything, and people who are otherwise appear to be moral people who will just shut all that off when it comes to Trump. So, just like the people that voted for the Goat Land Doctor, how do we educate the public or break through that? Thanks.
Well, a great question, and that's a tough one. I think more than anything, you got to be willing to talk about it. And I know that sounds kind of simple, but you know how when you get into conversations about difficult stuff, and how do people always end that conversation? Say, well, can't solve all the world problems today, can we? Well, that took care of that, didn't it? And they always make fun of it like you shouldn't be talking about that. Well, actually, you should be talking about that. We talk about everything else but that. And we can talk about anything else but that in the way we need to talk about it. And it's challenging to be able to talk about it. As academics, it's hard to talk about those things in class because we're trying to be fair and balanced, right? no pun intended. But you're trying to be fair and balanced, and and that makes it a little tricky at times. So people tend to not go there because it gets a little dicey at times. If you got a Trump supporter in the room and he gets mad, and he's got the right to give his point of view, and we need to respect that point of view. But some other kid over here may be offended by that, and there could be some little tension going on. So instead of having that debate and that discussion and that kind of open, free democracy, we tend to just avoid it. So we need to learn how to talk about it. And young people need to learn how to talk to their friends about it. And that's a big one. Because young people are taught that none of this stuff really matters. But in the end, it always catches up with you. Think about healthcare. It's like you go anywhere else in the world and you break your arm, you go to the hospital and they go, thanks a lot. Be careful next time. And you don't even get a bill. Not in America. So, we lose our entire inheritance, our entire everything, because somebody gets cancer and then you have to be in the hospital for a couple of months and you lose all your money. And so, if the more we talk about those things and we take ownership of those things, I think the more we'll find answers to those things. And the fact that we talk about the Royals and the Chiefs and we talk about everything but that stuff, and we've got to turn this stuff into normal conversation. And the thing about it is that people are scared to talk about it. White people in particular are scared to talk about it because they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. And we have to be a little more generous to our white neighbors and not pounce on them when they say the wrong thing. Because we got to encourage them to talk about these things. And when I travel around the country and I show my movies, white people want to talk about this stuff. But they don't know how and they don't know where. And so that's the real challenge is setting up an environment where you can have those kind of honest conversations. And you can talk about these things, and facts can be delivered without all the baggage that goes along with facts these days. Because that's a big part of the problem, is that facts have all this baggage that makes them so disruptive. Yes?
Is the black police officer still living?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
What did he have with you in making of the movie?
The real Ron Stallworth is a great guy. He's a policeman. I mean, he's got that policeman kind of demeanor, just the facts, ma'am, kind of thing. And when we won the Oscar, he was on stage with us. He came up and was on stage with us. So if you get to see that footage, he's the guy that looks like he shouldn't belong there. He's that. But Ron's a great guy, and the reason I'll do a little fact about the movie here. So in the end of the movie, I don't want to ruin for anybody that's not seen it, but the third act of the movie, the last third of the film, I had to make a lot of that up because Ron was such a good policeman. They shut the Klan down. So the Klan's actual plan was to blow up this gay nightclub in Colorado Springs, and they were able to shut them down. And so in movies, you got to have a climax. You got to have something happening big at the end. So I had to and I tried to do it in the spirit of what really did happen, the attempted bombing and all that, and we actually, and the thing one of the things I kind of love about Spike is that Spike's not real big on shootouts in movies. So he wanted the Klan guys. We had to get rid of those guys. They had to meet their maker, but they met their maker on their own. They blew themselves up, and so that's. I love the fact that he kind of narrowed my choices down and kind of forced me to kind of have to figure that one out. But that's kind of the point, that hate kills hate. Hate is something that just destroys itself. And that's what we kind of do in the film. Yes, sir.
Growing up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in the 70s, I saw this movie about 40 plus years ago.
Yes, indeed.
And I try to consider myself or think of myself as an intelligent individual, and I always knew racism would always be there throughout my life.
Right.
I just never thought it would be out in the open again, as it is now, as it was then. And I'm curious what your thoughts were about thinking of it back then and whether you thought it would ever be this way again.
Well, you really nailed it. I mean, the reality of it is that I think from that democratic point of view again, is that you have to kind of expect racism to always be a part of American life. And that's just the nature of kind of who we are. Black folks, white folks, everybody. And that's okay, because democratically, then that's what makes us have to be vigilant. And that's the thing that makes us have to always be on the guard and be watching for it, and understanding that economic situations, various factors within society can make those things grow into ugly, hateful, dangerous things. So you have to always be monitoring it. You always have to be on top of it. You always have to be kind of, really vigilant. That's the word I love to use, vigilant about this, because without that vigilance, bad things grow and bad things happen. And you're right. I mean, none of us we always knew racism would always be there. It had gotten better since we were kids. I think all of us would say, yeah, it's gotten a little better. The fact that President Obama became president, was a miracle. I mean, my father being born in 1898, I wish he could have seen President Obama. Because, I mean, when I was a kid, the joke was always, he had to be a black president, he would die the next day. That was always the joke. That was always the joke. That was just what we believed. And the fact that President Obama happened, it was like a miracle. And I think that because it was such a great thing, that we took our guard down. We kind of felt, we went to sleep a little bit. Remember when everybody was talking about post-racial society? And that's that thing about wanting to be comfortable again. And it's the reality of democracy is that when Obama was elected, we should have been saying, we got to really get on our JOB now. And the thing that we're experiencing right now in the country is the backlash from President Obama.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing we should have known was coming. It's created a really dangerous environment right now. And and you hope that we figure this thing out before something really bad does happen. Yeah.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much for this talk.
Thank you.
So I think about vigilance a lot these days too, and somehow I got stuck on the goat gland guy. And, this hypervigilance that I have is probably involved in this. But, I'd heard of him frequently. I didn't know the story of the almost won election and the technicality of scrutinizing, and I might use the language, undermining the will of the electorate.
Right.
Which is what that was.
It was.
And yet, as you pointed out, this was a way of protecting the state.
Yeah.
And because I'm hypervigilant about this and thinking about it, I'm very uncomfortable, and I'd really like to hear you talk more about it, please.
No, you're right. I mean, the fact that they kind of did the secret undercover, we're not going to let this dude be governor. I mean, that was everything that democracy is not supposed to be. And he should have become governor, and we should have been ridiculed for 4 or 8 years because there's a goat gland guy being in charge of the state. And that's the problem with democracy. That is the challenge of democracy, that a dangerous person can get into power. If enough people think that this guy should be the guy, whether he's doing goat glands or whatever he's doing, that's who you get. And the lesson for me with that is not so much that the rigged election, which is a really great point. I mean, that's a horrible thing. Say everything that we don't believe in. But when I learned that story, it was that, man, you know, what may happen next as our standards continue to lower and we get used to all the crazy things that we're getting used to now, and they become the norm. This is becoming normality now. You know, talking about John McCain like they do, and no one from that party says anything about it. No one stands up and says, you can't, right? You would think some guy would be a Jimmy Stewart, stand up and kind of do the whole great speech about John McCain. Radio silence. And, you know, I wasn't a big fan of John McCain, but I respected John McCain. You know, I don't agree with him politically on a lot of things, but he was clearly a great man, and he was clearly a great American and a great veteran, and those things are not, I always was taught that those things were kind of off limits. You know, we kind of took that for granted, right, until now. So that's that dangerous thing that you're talking about. You know, when you start getting used to that, then what will somebody say next? And then they get used to that, and then what will they say next? And then you get used to that, and it gets lower. The bar gets lower and lower and lower. Right?
Professor Willmott, this question comes to us from Stacy Freeman at Highland Community College. And she asks, Toni Morrison discusses the concept of othering as a means of control in America. This othering, according to Morrison, is due to the implied whiteness in the term American. Morrison believes that those who are marginalized because the term American is modified by terms such as African, Asian, etc. For example, African American. You discuss the concept of double consciousness and the importance of embracing being both Black and American. In your opinion, could the embracing of this double consciousness further marginalize individuals?
Well, she makes a great point. You know, it's a really great point, because we're all Americans. But, you know, because we've got this history that follows us everywhere we go, and because the history controls us, we don't control the history. It makes us hyphenate ourselves. And the fact that, you know, my father's mother was a slave, you know, the fact that she was a slave and then my father had to live through Jim Crow segregation, that history follows my family and follows every Black family in the country. You know, every Japanese American has a history of the internment camps that followed them. So we all have these things that follow us, right, as Americans. And the challenge of that is, you know, we're working toward that thing that Toni Morrison is talking about, where we become just Americans. And the only way we can become just Americans is that history has to catch up with us, and we have to own the history, and we have to be able to talk freely about the history, and we won't be offended by it. And that's the thing that we're not nearly close enough to yet. So that's my take on it, is that that's the goal. That's kind of the measuring stick to being when America really is America, is that when we are able to get rid of the hyphen, you know you made it.
Well, there's one group of
the stream can't hear you.
Might say,
okay, so I'm listening to this. I grew up a child of a family of German ancestry in Argentina through the dictatorship years. So I grew up hearing from the different branches in my family what went on during the Nazi times, and feeling insanely uncomfortable with that, but saved because we were 3 generations local.
Sure.
And then came the dictatorship, and I was in college during those years, and they took the children away from the mothers, and the mothers were giving birth in captivity, and the children would be stolen. And so I think when I saw what was coming up here, I got my children passports, but there's no point in going anywhere because of my job here, my retirement, my children, my school, everything. I can go anywhere, right? So I was wondering what you think, how long this will last and what the end will be, because both in Argentina and in Germany, it was a big fat war and a lot of people died.
Right. Well, you know, we've kind of been living in a cold civil war in the country ever since the real Civil War. You know, the example I always give is where I live, Lawrence, Kansas. You know, my kids went to Free State High School. You know, Lawrence loves to celebrate the Free State. You know, Mass Street, Massachusetts Street, Lawrence is founded by abolitionists from Massachusetts. But after the Civil War, Lawrence is segregated. It's not the Mississippi Board of Education case that desegregates schools. It's the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education case. So in many ways, the South won the Civil War. And that's one of those lessons that we were never taught also. And so when you start to kind of look at, I call it the history that we feel. It may not be the history that we know, but it is the history that we feel. And that's the thing that you're describing. You're describing the history in Argentina that you feel. And you felt that. You felt that, and you've had to experience that for all these years. And it's a complicated history, and it's a complicated political reality. And so the thing is that you've got to try to own that history, not be ashamed of that history. And you've got to be able to explain to others who may not understand it, you've got to tell them what the deal is. And that's really hard to do. It's very uncomfortable, especially a history that contains genocide within it. And so, but that's the only answer to that. When we are ashamed of it, when we feel guilty about it, it's like germs. That's where the ugly hate stuff grows. Because we have to put a light on it. And when you put a light on it and you take ownership of it, it tends to die. And it dies only from our understanding of it. So when we understand it, then it can't hurt us anymore. When we don't understand it, that's how riots happen. That's how all these misunderstandings that lead to racial violence happens. That's how you get these white guys that go into synagogues and start killing everybody because they think the Jews are taking something from them, because they've had some disappointing things in their personal life, but they go and blame somebody else for their personal problems. So that's the reality of kind of how this thing works. But thank you very much. I know that's difficult stuff to talk about. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, would you address what the indigenous people might say about their history and whether they would even use the word America?
Yeah, that's great. That's a great one. I made a film called The Only Good Indian. And in that film, it's based in the boarding schools that happen all over the country. Haskell Industrial Institute was the boarding school back in the old days. Now it's Haskell Nations University now. So, and it is the only university that was formerly a boarding school. And let me tell you what a boarding school was. A boarding school, it's kind of very similar to the thing that's happening on the border now. These boarding schools took Native American children from their parents, took them far away from where their parents lived. Like, they would take them from the Southwest and take them to Lawrence, Kansas, so that they couldn't run back home and get back home to their parents. So they take them to a boarding school there, and they lived there in this school, and they cut their hair because Native Americans believed that their hair is an important thing that should not be cut. They were banned to use their own language, their tribal language. You could not use your tribal language. You could not connect with your tribal religion and your tribal customs. So the motto of these schools was kill the Indian and save the man. So the whole notion again was, we're going to make you divorce yourself from your Indian self so you can assimilate into American society. Again, it's that thing we've been talking about all night about how you've got to be able to find a way to do both. And so these Native Americans, you know, the film I made is about a young man who's trying to get back home to his family. And that question you ask is a tough one because, you know, this is the big anniversary going on right now of African Americans being brought to this country. And Native Americans were there at the docks. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the fact that we still have so many things that are offensive to Native Americans as part of our normal culture right now. Right. Washington Redskins, really? Mm-hmm. You know, in my film CSA, I call them the New York niggas. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so we had to, because African Americans are large enough in numbers, we were able to fight those kind of horrible stereotypes, and they've kind of gone away for the most part. But Native Americans are a small population in America. And so it's harder for them to fight things like the Washington Redskins. And so it takes it upon the people in the majority to see how disgraceful something like that really is. And so my job as a storyteller is to satire it and try to expose the absurdity and ignorance of it. But yeah, I mean, you know, Native Americans, you know, they're the only ones that can claim the term American. And we don't even think about that concept.
Yes, I really appreciate all that you bring to the table, and specifically about not trying to create more injury. So how do you address the issue of when some white groups, particularly millennials and others, who see affirmative action or any kind of diversity and inclusion opportunities as reverse discrimination?
That's a great question. You know, that's one of the challenges of democracy again, because the notion of affirmative action and any kind of, you know, programs to kind of, you know, equalize the injustice of the past in some way or another. I mean, you know, that's why I always like to tell this story about my father. You know, my father, you know, growing up in Mississippi at the turn of the century, he told me one time they were so hungry, they ate roots out of a tree. And I remember that. And he also told me it's a white man's world. Because that's the world that he lived in. Black people had no rights that anyone had to respect. And you could be killed at any time in Mississippi for anything. And there were no law authorities that you could have turned to for any kind of protection. And so the more you understand those realities, the more you understand affirmative action. So, and it's not a liberal thing. It's not about, you know, Democrats. It's not about that. It's about understanding the history of what it is. Understanding what Native Americans have gone through in this country. You will not look at Native Americans the same way. I mean, their civil rights movement, we don't even know about. We don't even teach that history in school. So, you know, that's the challenge of us. We've got to kind of look at ourselves and say, for America to be okay, we got to set a bunch of new priorities so we know what the heck's really going on, so that people aren't so uninformed about the things that end up being factors in our everyday life, like affirmative action, like, you know, like healthcare, and like all the things, the basic things that people kind of have to deal with in their everyday life. Those things all connect to bigger things from our history. And the more you understand the history, the more you see the point of view of the people that are trying to push those ideas today.
I'm going to suggest that we take 2 more questions. Sure. Does that sound good?
Hi, Kevin. Thank you for all your films and your openness to talking to us. This is already your 2nd trip here to K-State. Thank you for that.
Sure.
I want to ask you to talk a little more about the ending of BlacKkKlansman, because I was so shocked. I did not expect that ending, and it horrified me and scared me. But it was so powerful and it made me think. And I want to know, you know, kind of what was the process that you and your co-writers went through in thinking and making that decision to kind of show clips from very recent, events, and adding that to the film.
Sure. Well, the original ending of the movie was that scene where you see Ron and Patrice go down the hallway, and they've got their guns out because they think something weird is going on, and they go down the hallway. That spike shot he always does, but it looks like they're not moving, and so they go down the hallway, and you see the Klan cross out into the window, and they go through the window, and you see this Klan rally out there. That was the original ending of the film. And the idea, Spike from the very beginning wanted it to relate to today, and he wanted to say it's an ongoing problem. And Spike is he's not real big on period movies. If we're going to do a period movie, he wants to really to speak to today in some kind of way. That's why we did the America First. The America First thing was, the American Nazi Klan slogan in the 1930s. Make America Great Again. If you get on YouTube and look up the Donahue Show, you'll see David Duke talking about Make America Great Again in the 1970s. So those slogans were always a part of hate groups in various ways. America First, Charles Lindbergh, the great aviator, he was a Nazi, an American Nazi. There was an Academy Award nominated short film about the huge Nazi rally they had at Madison Square Garden in the 1930s. And you can get online and see that for free. Huge rally of Nazis in New York City in the 1930s. You can't make this up. And so all of that kind of influenced the ending. And so the kind of the idea of the ending was, Heather Heyer, the young lady who was unfortunately murdered at Charlottesville. Spike called her mother, got permission to use the footage, it's such a horrible crime. It was kind of an editor Spike decision. It wasn't so much us as writers. So when Charlottesville happened and you saw David Duke there, and you saw the president talking about that stuff, it just informed the film. And when we were at Cannes, and I think one of the reasons we won the prize at Cannes was that the world is really worried about America. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The world knows we're kind of in trouble right now. And the world has always looked to us for democracy. And they've always looked at us as this stable thing that you could turn to and you could always count on. And so I think part of why they awarded us the film, it was because we were kind of showing what's really happening right now.
Professor Willmott, these questions and comments come to us as posed from Lucy Cobian of Dodge City Community College. And she says, first and foremost, she wants to thank you for the opportunity to watch your live stream and to congratulate you on your Oscar.
Thank you.
And she goes on to comment that she related to the double identity aspect, where she goes through times where she doesn't feel Mexican enough or American enough. And she asks you, what are ways to address or bring up conversations to improve relations between groups of people who don't want to accept a different idea from an opinion or prejudice they hold?
I think one of the big ones is that when you're with your friends, and I'm speaking really about young people in particular, when young people are with their friends and they're having their normal kind of everyday hanging out stuff, and then somebody says something ignorant, somebody says something racist, you've got to call them out right there. And that takes a lot of courage for a young person to do that. And one of the things that black students that I teach and I see around the country, black students get tired of having to be educators as well as students. They don't like that. But the reality of it is, it's an unfortunate reality, but all of us have to kind of be teachers and educators a little bit. And we have to be willing to kind of explain things to people, because a lot of things people just don't get. It's like the 60s, they just fly over certain communities, and it never landed. It never, those things that we take for granted of understanding about race, about, gender, about all the things that kind of matter in terms of us getting along in democracy. It's a lot of things that people don't get. And so when that stuff comes up, you got to be willing to call people out and not attack them, but educate them. You got to break it down. And so I would suggest she needs to know the history. She needs to know specifically, she needs to know the history of what it means to be a Mexican American. And she needs to be able to break that down for people who maybe don't understand that. And one of the things that I did as a kid was I did it with humor. And that's kind of how I do it in my movies. You know, when people would say ignorant stuff to me, you know, one time I worked at Alco Discount Center. Y'all remember Alco Discount Center? Worked at Alco Discount Center, and then there was a cigarette butt on the floor, and this lady said, "Pick that up, Kevin." I said, "No, they entered in the late 1800s." And it's, you know, and she kind of didn't know exactly what I was talking about. But it was a sophisticated joke. But jokes are a good way to make people go home and go, "Oh, that's what he was talking about." And so I'm not your slave, right? And so, you know, that's the way. I think the more we kind of find ways, everybody does it in their way. That's the way I did it. I did it with humor. Everybody has to find their way of doing it. And some people use humor, some people are dramatic about it. Whatever way you feel comfortable is the way you should do it. But you have to do it.
This has been amazing, Kevin. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. That was beautiful.